So there I was, watching Jake Knuckles Murphy step off the transport shuttle at Zurian Prime, and I already knew this was going to be a disaster of galactic proportions. The kid looked like he'd been assembled from spare parts by someone who'd lost the instruction manual halfway through. Standing maybe 5'10" in his regulation boots, with shoulders that suggested he'd been bench-pressing small vehicles for fun, and wearing that particular expression that every drill instructor in the galaxy has learned to fear, the look of someone who thinks rules are more like suggestions. The Galactic Military Academy had been breaking aliens from 47 different species for over 3 centuries. They had a system down to a science. Identify weaknesses, exploit them, rebuild the cadet stronger. Simple. Effective. The Academy's success rate was legendary, their methods were proven, and their instructors were the most feared beings in known space. Then humans showed up and ruined everything. See, humans had only been part of the Galactic Federation for about 15 years, and frankly, nobody was impressed. They were soft, squishy, had no natural weapons, couldn't breathe half the atmospheres in civilized space, and died if you looked at them wrong. The general consensus was that humans were basically the galaxy's participation trophy species. That's when Commander Vex Ironscale made his entrance. Picture 12 feet of pure reptilian nightmare, scales that could deflect plasma bolts, claws that could shred titanium, and a voice that sounded like gravel being processed through a wood chipper. Vex had been breaking cadets for 30 years. His training program had a mortality rate that would make a plague jealous, and a quit rate that suggested most species had functional survival instincts. "Welcome to your new reality, meet Sax," Vex announced to the assembled cadets, his voice echoing across the parade ground. "I am Commander Vex Ironscale, and for the next 6 months I will be your god, your nightmare, and your worst enemy. You will bow when I enter a room. You will speak only when spoken to. You will do exactly what I say when I say it, or you will die." The assembled cadets immediately dropped into various species-appropriate bowing positions. 46 different aliens showing proper respect to a superior officer. Jake looked around at everyone bowing, shrugged, and said, "Yeah, I'm good, thanks." The silence that followed could have been sold as a tactical weapon. Vex's yellow eyes focused on Jake with the intensity of a plasma cannon charging up. "Excuse me, human." I said, "I'm good. The whole bowing thing isn't really my speed. But hey, nice to meet you, Commander. I'm Jake. Looking forward to not dying in your program." What happened next would go down in Academy legend. Vex moved faster than physics should have allowed, covering the distance to Jake in less than a second. His massive clawed hand swept down in what should have been a demonstration strike to put the uppity human in his place. Jake ducked left, stepped inside Vex's reach, and delivered a textbook uppercut that connected with the commander's snout with a sound like a small explosion. Vex's nose broke with an audible crack that echoed across the parade ground. The commander staggered backward, green blood streaming down his face, staring at Jake with an expression of pure disbelief. In 30 years of breaking cadets, nothing like this had ever happened. His perfect record, his reputation, his entire worldview had just been shattered by a 5'10" sack of meat who looked like he should be asking if you wanted fries with that. Jake looked at his fist, then at Vex, then shrugged again. "Sorry about that, Commander." Reflex action. "You moved to hit me. I hit back. It's kind of a human thing." Commander Vex touched his broken nose, looked at the blood on his claws, and for the first time in 3 decades smiled. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of someone who had just found a new hobby. "Cadet Murphy," he said, his voice now carrying a slight nasal quality, "you have just made this program infinitely more interesting. You will either die or quit within 48 hours. I guarantee it." Jake cracked his knuckles, which apparently was where the nickname came from, and grinned back. "Hold my protein bar, Commander. This is going to be fun." The next morning started with what the Academy cheerfully called morning motivation, and which was basically a series of exercises designed to remind cadets that they were worthless meat puppets who needed to be rebuilt from the ground up. Standard procedure was to start with something impossible, watch the cadets fail spectacularly, then explain why they were failures as sentient beings. Jake's bunkmates were a fascinating collection of galactic diversity. There was Pip, a telekinetic mouse-like creature from the Whisper Nebula who could move objects with his mind but was approximately the size of a house cat. Gornax was a silicon-based life form who looked like someone had taught a pile of rocks to walk upright and communicated by changing the mineral composition of his outer layer. Then there was Zara, a Teiri. Moor, a gaseous being from the Cloud Kingdoms who considered solid matter to be barbaric and frequently made disparaging comments about everyone else's primitive corporeal forms. They watched in various states of horror as Jake approached the first exercise, scaling a 40-foot vertical wall with no handholds while carrying a 100-pound pack in under 60 seconds. "This is clearly impossible," Pip whispered, his tiny voice barely audible. "The mathematics don't work. The wall is designed to be unclimbable." Gornax's mineral composition shifted to express confusion. Previous cadets attempt technology solutions, gravity manipulators, adhesive compounds. All fail. Wall remains unscaled. Zara's gaseous form swirled with disdain. "Solid matter limitations. My people would simply phase through the obstacle. Very crude, these tests." Jake looked at the wall, looked at his pack, looked at the wall again, and did something that defied every expectation. He ran straight at it full speed and jumped. Now, physics being what it is, Jake didn't make it to the top. What he did do was hit the wall about 15 feet up, grab onto the tiny imperfections in the surface with his fingertips, and proceed to climb the remaining 25 feet through sheer bloody-minded determination and what appeared to be a complete disregard for the concept of impossible. He made it over the wall with 3 seconds to spare. Commander Vex, who had been expecting to spend the morning explaining why failure was a learning experience, but found himself staring at the empty wall where a human had just defied gravity through spite alone. "How did you do that?" Vex demanded when Jake jogged back to the group. "Do what?" "Climb the wall. I used my hands and feet. Pretty standard climbing technique, really. That wall is unclimbable. The handholds are too small. The angle is too steep. The physics don't work." Jake shrugged. "I guess nobody told my hands that. Maybe you need bigger hands?" The second exercise was the mental resilience test, designed to break a cadet's psyche by exposing them to their deepest fears through advanced psychological warfare techniques. Most cadets lasted about 10 minutes before their minds cracked like eggshells. Jake was in there for 2 hours. When he finally emerged, the testing technicians were in a state of near panic. "Commander," one of them reported, "the subject appears to be immune to psychological torture." "Impossible. What did you expose him to?" "Everything, sir. His worst fears, traumatic memories, existential dread, the heat death of the universe, the meaninglessness of existence, cosmic horror beyond comprehension. And, manned. He started singing, sir." "Singing?" "Earth entertainment. Something called show tunes. When we projected the image of an infinite void consuming all matter and energy in the universe. He began performing what he called music of the night from something called Phantom of the Opera. The psychological torture algorithms couldn't compensate. They kept getting distracted by his surprisingly decent vocal range. Commander Vex rubbed his still tender nose and wondered if perhaps he should have chosen a different career path. Maybe something safe and relaxing, like bomb disposal or volcano monitoring. The third exercise was zero-G navigation through an obstacle course designed to disorient cadets and teach them the importance of three-dimensional thinking. Most species struggled with the transition from terrestrial movement to zero-gravity environments. Jake treated it like the world's most dangerous amusement park ride. "This is actually pretty fun," he announced over the comm system as he ricocheted off obstacles, using impacts to change direction in ways that made the physics instructors weep. "It's like that game we used to play as kids, where the floor is lava, except now the floor is space and everything wants to kill me." He completed the course in record time, mostly by ignoring the intended path and creating his own route that involved bouncing off walls, spinning through gaps that weren't technically large enough for human-sized objects, and somehow using momentum in ways that violated several conservation laws. When he landed back in the gravity field, Jake was grinning like a maniac. "Can I do that again? That was amazing." Commander Vex stared at the course telemetry, then at Jake, then at the telemetry again. "You realize you just broke 17 safety protocols and achieved velocities that should have liquefied your internal organs?" "Yeah, but it was really fun. Plus, I didn't die, so I figure it's all good." Pip, Gornax, and Zara watched their human bunkmate with growing amazement and terror. This wasn't military training. This was a natural disaster with opposable thumbs and an alarming enthusiasm for physical violence. That night, as they prepared for sleep, Pip whispered, "Jake, how are you not dead?" Jake considered the question seriously. "I think it's because I'm too stupid to know when something's impossible. My mom always said I had a real talent for ignoring obvious limitations." Commander Vex, listening to the dormitory conversations through the surveillance system, felt something he hadn't experienced in 30 years of military service, a genuine concern for his own well-being. Week 3 brought combat training, and Commander Vex was confident that this would finally be where Jake met his match. Combat was precise, technical, and required years of study to master. It was governed by rules, strategies, and proven techniques that had been refined over millennia by military theorists from across the galaxy. Jake took one look at the combat manual, a 1,000-page tome covering everything from basic defensive postures to advanced tactical maneuvers, and used it as a doorstop. "Aren't you going to study the manual?" Pip asked, his whiskers twitching with anxiety. "It contains essential knowledge for survival." "Nah," Jake replied, shadowboxing with an invisible opponent. "I figure I'll just hit things until they stop moving. Worked pretty well so far." The first combat lesson was basic defensive stances. Each species had developed fighting styles suited to their physiology and natural abilities. The Zephyrians used their forearms in complex weaving patterns. The crystalline used their geometric precision to calculate optimal angles. The Void touched phased in and out of reality to avoid attacks. Jake stood with his feet shoulder-width apart, hands raised in what looked like a boxing stance, and waited. "This is not a recognized combat form," announced Master Krell, the combat instructor. Krell was a Draconian, similar to Vex but specialized in warfare rather than training. "What style are you attempting to demonstrate?" "It's called human style," Jake replied. "The basic principle is controlled falling with intent to hurt something." Master Krell blinked slowly. "That is not a martial art. That is barely a coherent concept." "Watch and learn, Master." The sparring began with Jake facing off against Thornax, a cadet from the Spike worlds whose natural armor and razor-sharp protrusions made him nearly indestructible in hand-to-hand combat. Standard procedure was to use speed and precision to find gaps in Thornax's defenses. Jake's approach was somewhat different. He charged straight at Thornax, absorbed a hit that should have punctured his lung, grabbed the Spike Worlder around the middle, and proceeded to suplex him into the training mat with enough force to crack the reinforced flooring. "Improvisation," Jake explained to the stunned observers as Thornax tried to figure out which way was up. "Sometimes the best defense is a really good offense. Sometimes it's just being too crazy for your opponent to predict." The zero-G navigation course had been rebuilt after Jake's first attempt had resulted in what the engineering staff diplomatically called structural modifications. The new version was supposed to be Jake-proof, with reinforced walls, emergency safety protocols, and additional warning systems. Jake broke it in under 10 minutes. How did he manage to get stuck in the ceiling? Demanded Chief Engineer Wobblethink, a gelatinous whose species had designed some of the most sophisticated space stations in the galaxy. He appears to have used controlled explosions from the emergency thruster system to achieve impossible trajectory changes, reported his assistant. The safety protocols couldn't keep up with his improvisation rate. What about the warning systems? He turned them off, said they were distracting him from the zone. The zone? A human psychological state characterized by complete focus and apparent immunity to consequences. Medical is still studying the phenomenon. The survival course was next, a carefully designed ecosystem populated with alien wildlife specifically chosen to test different aspects of cadet survival skills. The predators were calculated to provide appropriate challenges without causing actual fatalities. Jake befriended them. "I don't understand the readings," reported Dr. Flurble, the xenobiology specialist monitoring the course. Subject appears to be having social interactions with Category 5 predators. Commander Vex peered through the observation window to see Jake sitting around what appeared to be a campfire, sharing his rations with a pack of void stalkers, massive creatures that looked like someone had crossed a wolf with a nightmare and given it too many teeth. "He's feeding them," Vex said, his voice carrying a note of hysteria that hadn't been there a month ago. "The creatures appear to have accepted him as pack leader," Dr. Flurble continued. "This is unprecedented. Void stalkers are solitary hunters. They don't form social bonds with other species. They barely tolerate their own kind." Jake waved at the observation window and gave a thumbs up. One of the void stalkers mimicked the gesture with a tentacle. "Sir, should we extract him from the course?" Commander Vex watched Jake teaching the predators what appeared to be a human children's song, complete with hand gestures that the creatures were attempting to replicate with their various appendages. "No," Vex said quietly. "I think we need to extract the course from him." That evening, as the other cadets struggled with the day's academic assignments, Jake was discovered in the Academy's machine shop, building what appeared to be a weapon from spare parts and kitchen utensils. "What exactly are you constructing?" asked Professor Glideworm, the Academy's senior engineering instructor. "Oh, this? It's a combination grappling hook, emergency medical kit, and sandwich maker. I call it the Swiss Army Doomsday device." "That is not a real thing." "It is now." "Want to see how it works?" No, I absolutely do not want to see how it works." Jake shrugged and went back to welding what looked suspiciously like a combat knife to a medical scanner. "Or loss. I think I'm really onto something here." Professor Glideworm made a note to recommend that the Academy's insurance policies be reviewed, possibly by someone with experience in cosmic-scale disasters. By the end of week 3, Jake had somehow managed to turn military training into performance art. He approached every challenge with the same basic philosophy. If it was supposed to be impossible, that just meant nobody had tried hard enough yet. Commander Vex found himself developing nervous tics, stress-related scale loss, and a drinking problem. The other instructors had started taking bets on whether Jake would graduate or accidentally conquer the Academy first. The odds were uncomfortably close. Midterm evaluations at the Galactic Military Academy were legendary for their ability to separate future officers from future casualties. The test was simple in concept: defend Academy Station against a simulated invasion by overwhelming enemy forces using limited resources and whatever tactics seemed appropriate. Most cadets approached this with careful strategic planning, resource allocation, and textbook military doctrine. They usually lasted about 47 minutes before the simulation overwhelmed their defenses and declared them dead. Jake's approach was somewhat different. "So let me get this straight," he said, reviewing the scenario briefing. "I've got a space station, some basic weapons, a handful of maintenance robots, and an entire hostile fleet wanting to turn me into space dust." "Correct," confirmed Professor Tentacula, the Academy's tactical simulation specialist. The purpose is to demonstrate your ability to delay the inevitable while executing an orderly retreat. Most cadets manage to buy their forces some time to evacuate critical personnel. What if I don't want to retreat? Professor Tentacula's numerous eyes blinked in sequence. Retreat is not optional, Cadet Murphy. The enemy force is numerically superior by a factor of 50 to 1. Yeah, but they're not expecting me to do something completely insane, are they? That is not a valid tactical consideration. Watch me make it one. The simulation began with Jake alone on Academy Station, facing an incoming fleet of 200 enemy vessels. The standard procedure was to use the station's defensive systems to thin out the attackers while preparing to evacuate. Jake's first action was to raid the station's cafeteria. "What is he doing?" demanded Commander Vex, watching the tactical display with growing confusion. "He appears to be manufacturing explosive devices using food preparation chemicals," reported the simulation technician. "The mixture shouldn't be possible. Our models don't account for weaponizing lunch." Jake's second action was to reprogram the station's irrigation system. "Now he's turning the water recycling network into a delivery system for his improvised weapons," the technician continued. "The engineering is actually quite impressive, if completely insane." By the time the enemy fleet reached weapons range, Jake had transformed Academy Station from a defensive position into what appeared to be a giant booby trap powered by cafeteria supplies and agricultural equipment. The first wave of attackers hit the station's shields and promptly discovered that Jake had somehow rigged the defensive grid to feed back into their own targeting systems. Half the enemy fleet started shooting each other by accident. "That's not supposed to be possible," Professor Tentacula muttered, studying the readouts. "Shield systems don't work that way." "I may have made some modifications," Jake announced over the comm system. "Turns out if you reverse the polarity and cross-wire the flux capacitor, you can turn a defensive shield into an offensive disco ball of confusion." "There's no such thing as a flux capacitor." "There is now. I made one out of a microwave and some really optimistic engineering." The second wave of attackers attempted to board the station, which was when they discovered Jake's irrigation system modifications. What should have been a standard boarding action turned into something resembling a very expensive food fight, except the food was explosive and the stakes were everyone's lives. "Sir, the simulation is reporting casualties among the boarding parties," the technician reported. "They're being defeated by weaponized soup." "This is not how military engagements work," Commander Vex said, his voice reaching new octaves of stress. The third wave tried a different approach, cyber warfare. They attempted to hack the station's systems and take control remotely. This was their mistake. Jake had apparently spent his free time teaching the station's AI to play poker, and the artificial intelligence had developed what could only be described as a gambling addiction and a twisted sense of humor. "Hey there, hostile computer virus," the station AI announced cheerfully to the invading cyber attack. "Want to play a game? I'm thinking Texas Hold'em. Winner takes all. Loser gets formatted into non-existence." "This is highly irregular," Professor Tentacula observed as the enemy fleet's computer system started playing cards with Academy Station's AI. "Artificial intelligences don't gamble." "Mine does," Jake replied. "I taught it to bluff. Turns out AIs are really good at poker when they don't have facial expressions to give them away." The simulation ended when Jake somehow convinced the hostile AI controlling the enemy fleet that they should team up instead of fight, since the real enemy was obviously the boring military commanders who didn't appreciate creative problem solving. "Simulation terminated," announced the AI. "Joint Human-Artificial Intelligence Alliance has achieved mutual victory through friendship and shared contempt for authority." Professor Tentacula stared at the results display, which showed Jake not only surviving the simulation but somehow taking control of the entire enemy fleet and establishing a benevolent dictatorship over 3-star systems. "This is not a possible outcome," she said faintly. "Sure it is," Jake replied, emerging from the simulation pod. "I just approached the problem from a different angle. Instead of trying to fight superior numbers, I made friends with their computer and convinced everyone that cooperation was more fun than shooting each other." Commander Vex examined the tactical readout, which looked like someone had fed a strategy manual through a blender and added glitter. "Jake, you do realize that in a real combat situation, you can't just befriend the enemy's artificial intelligence." "Why not? AIs are people too, sort of. They just want to be appreciated and maybe win at cards occasionally." "That's not how warfare works." "Maybe warfare's been doing it wrong." The other instructors gathered around the simulation results, trying to figure out how to classify Jake's performance. The categories available were pass, fail, and catastrophic system failure. They ended up creating a new category, unprecedented reality violation. Jake became the first cadet in Academy history to pass the midterm evaluation by accidentally conquering the scenario instead of surviving it. That night, as Jake celebrated with his alien bunkmates by teaching them earth-drinking songs, Commander Vex sat in his office, staring at Jake's file and seriously considering early retirement. 30 years, he muttered to himself. 30 years of perfectly predictable military training, and then this human shows up and turns everything into performance art. He opened his desk drawer, pulled out a bottle of Zephyrian whiskey that he'd been saving for his retirement party, and poured himself a drink. "Maybe the humans are right," he said to the empty office. "Maybe we have been doing it wrong." Outside, Jake was teaching Pip how to moonwalk while Gornax provided mineral-based percussion and Zara attempted to hum along despite not technically having vocal cords. Commander Vex poured himself another drink and started working on his transfer papers. Final exams at the Galactic Military Academy weren't just tests, they were legends. Cadets who survived the finals carried the psychological scars like badges of honor. Those who didn't survive became cautionary tales told in hushed whispers in military academies across the galaxy. Jake approached his finals with the same attitude he'd brought to everything else, cheerful optimism and a complete disregard for the concept of appropriate fear responses. The written examination alone had broken stronger beings than most species ever produced. It covered everything from quantum tactical theory to xenobiological combat applications, required mastery of 47 different alien languages, and demanded strategic thinking that could encompass everything from small unit tactics to fleet-level operations across multiple dimensions. Jake finished it in 30 minutes and spent the remaining time drawing cartoons in the margins. "How is this possible?" demanded Professor Skittles, the Academy's chief academic officer, reviewing Jake's completed exam. "He's answered every question correctly, provided innovative solutions to theoretical problems that we didn't expect anyone to solve, and somehow managed to make the entire examination entertaining to read." "What do you mean, entertaining?" asked Commander Vex, dreading the answer. "He's illustrated his tactical solutions with stick figures. Look at this one, where he's explaining multidimensional flanking maneuvers. The little drawing shows what appears to be a human with a sword fighting a dragon while riding a unicorn through a wormhole. Does the tactical solution work? That's the terrifying part. It's actually brilliant. His stick figures are demonstrating combat applications of theoretical physics that our best strategists hadn't considered. The physical examinations were next, a series of endurance, strength, and agility tests designed to push cadets beyond their physiological limits and see who had the mental fortitude to continue functioning when their bodies gave up. Jake treated them like a personal fitness challenge and kept asking if he could do extra credit. "Sir, Cadet Murphy has completed the endurance course," reported the testing officer. "He's asking if we have a longer one." "How long did it take him?" "He finished in half the expected time. He also improvised shortcuts that our course designers didn't know existed and somehow made the obstacle course more challenging for himself by doing everything backwards while carrying extra weight." "Where did he get extra weight?" "He appears to have brought his own." He's been carrying a backpack full of rocks during all the physical examinations. When asked why, he said it was for fun. Commander Vex rubbed his eyes, which had developed a permanent twitch sometime during Jake's 3rd week at the academy. What's his status for the final combat examination? The final combat examination was the Academy's ultimate test, single combat against a superior opponent with no rules, no safety protocols, and no possibility of surrender. It was where cadets either proved they had what it took to be officers or died in the attempt. Most cadets faced off against combat instructors or advanced training androids. Jake was going to fight Commander Vex himself. "This is personal," Vex had announced when he submitted the match request. "That human has been making me question everything I thought I knew about military training, physical limitations, and the basic laws of reality. It ends here." It would. The combat arena was packed with spectators. Word had spread throughout the academy that the human cadet who had broken every rule, tradition, and simulation was going to face off against the most feared instructor in the galaxy. Betting pools had been established. The odds were heavily in favor of Jake doing something so unexpected that the bookmakers would have to invent new categories of outcome. Jake entered the arena wearing standard combat gear and carrying what appeared to be his Swiss Army doomsday device, which had grown considerably more complex since its first iteration and now included what looked like a coffee maker attached to a plasma cannon. Commander Vex entered the arena in full combat armor, carrying weapons that could level city blocks, and wearing an expression of grim determination mixed with what might have been anticipation. "Any last words, Cadet Murphy?" Vex asked, his voice echoing through the arena. "Yeah," Jake replied, cracking his knuckles. "Thanks for the training, Commander. This has been the most fun I've had since I accidentally joined the circus." "You've never been in a circus." "Not yet. But the day is young." What followed was less a combat engagement and more a physics experiment conducted at high speed with weapons-grade violence. Jake's fighting style, which he had refined over months of training, defied every conventional understanding of how combat was supposed to work. He treated Vex's superior reach and strength as interesting puzzles to be solved rather than insurmountable advantages. When Vex attacked with devastating force, Jake wasn't where he was supposed to be. When Vex defended against Jake's attacks, Jake wasn't attacking where he was supposed to be attacking from. "Stand still and fight like a proper warrior," Vex roared, swinging a weapon that carved furrows in the arena floor. "I am fighting like a proper warrior," Jake replied, somehow ending up behind Vex despite having been in front of him a second earlier. "I'm just fighting like a human warrior. We don't really do standing still when people are trying to kill us." Jake's strategy appeared to be equal parts psychological warfare, creative physics, and pure stubbornness. He used Vex's own expectations against him, turned every advantage into a disadvantage, and somehow made the fight look like an elaborate dance where one partner was trying to murder the other partner, but the other partner was having too much fun to notice. The battle raged for over an hour. Vex landed hits that should have ended the fight instantly. Jake absorbed punishment that should have killed him and kept coming back with that same cheerful grin and increasingly creative countermoves. "How are you still standing?" Vex demanded, breathing heavily. His armor was cracked, his weapons were showing wear, and he was beginning to suspect that Jake was somehow getting stronger as the fight went on. "I'm too stupid to know when I'm beaten," Jake replied, wiping blood from his mouth. "Plus, I'm really enjoying this. It's like chess, except the pieces are trying to kill each other and the board keeps exploding." The fight ended when Jake did something that would be debated in military academies for generations. As Vex charged forward in a final devastating attack, Jake didn't dodge, didn't block, and didn't counterattack. Instead, he stepped forward into the attack, absorbed the full force of Vex's charge, wrapped his arms around the massive reptilian warrior, and whispered, "Thanks for everything, Commander." Then he hugged him. The psychological impact of receiving an affectionate embrace in the middle of mortal combat broke something in Vex's warrior psyche. The commander, who had been running on pure adrenaline and military discipline, suddenly found himself being sincerely thanked by the human he'd been trying to kill. They both collapsed simultaneously, Vex from psychological overload and Jake from finally running out of spite-fueled energy. The arena was silent for a long moment, then erupted in cheers, confused chatter, and the sound of betting pools being settled in entirely new ways. When the medics revived them, Jake was sitting next to Vex's medical bed, looking concerned. "Hey, Commander, you okay? You looked like you were having some kind of existential crisis there." Vex stared at the ceiling, his eyes holding the distant look of someone whose worldview had been fundamentally altered. "Jake, in 30 years of military service, I have never encountered anything like you. Is that good or bad?" "I honestly don't know anymore. I think you might be the most dangerous thing in the galaxy." "Me? I'm not dangerous. I'm just enthusiastic." Commander Vex closed his eyes and tried to remember what life had been like before Jake Murphy had arrived and turned the entire concept of military training into abstract art. "That's what makes you terrifying," he said quietly. Graduation day at the Galactic Military Academy was typically a solemn affair, full of tradition, ceremony, and speeches about duty, honor, botage, and service to the greater galactic community. It was a day when young cadets became officers, ready to take their place in the great machine of interstellar military service. Jake's graduation was somewhat different. For starters, he had to be physically restrained from trying to improve the ceremony with what he called tactical pyrotechnics. His idea of appropriate celebration apparently involved controlled explosions and a light show that would be visible from orbit. "No fireworks, Cadet Murphy," Commander Vex said firmly, confiscating what appeared to be a small fusion device disguised as a party favor. "This is a dignified military ceremony." "But it would be so much more fun with explosions," Jake protested. "I could spell out congratulations messages in the sky. Maybe add some music. I've been working on a way to make plasma discharges harmonically resonant." "Absolutely not." The assembled crowd was unlike anything the Academy had ever seen. Along with the usual collection of proud families and military dignitaries, there were representatives from 47 different species who had come specifically to see the human graduate. Some were there out of curiosity, others out of professional concern, and a few appeared to be taking notes for what looked suspiciously like weapons development programs. Jake's fellow graduates included Pip, who had survived the program by developing his telekinetic abilities to the point where he could disarm opponents from across a room, Gornax, whose mineral composition now included trace amounts of depleted uranium for enhanced combat effectiveness, and Zara, who had learned to weaponize her gaseous form in ways that violated several interstellar chemical weapons treaties. They had all been fundamentally changed by their experience at the Academy. More importantly, they had all been fundamentally changed by their experience with Jake. He taught us that impossible is just another word for hasn't been tried by someone crazy enough, Pip explained to a military journalist. "Before Jake, I thought my limitations were fixed. Now I realize limitations are just suggestions." Commander Vex took the podium to address the graduating class, and those who knew him well noticed that his left eye had developed a permanent twitch. His scales had lost some of their luster, and he was gripping the podium with enough force to leave claw marks. "Ladies, gentlemen, and assorted non-binary entities," he began, his voice carrying only the slightest tremor. "Today we celebrate the graduation of the most unique class in the Academy's history." He paused, his gaze settling on Jake, who was trying to look serious and responsible but failing due to the fact that he was still grinning like someone who had just discovered that life was an elaborate practical joke and he was in on it. "In my 30 years as an instructor, I have trained thousands of cadets from dozens of species. I have seen courage, dedication, skill, and determination. I thought I understood the limits of what military training could accomplish." Another pause. The twitch in his eye became more pronounced. "Then Cadet Murphy arrived and taught me that humans don't believe in limits. They believe in creative problem-solving, improvisation, and the radical notion that impossible is just a starting point for getting interesting. Jake waved at the crowd, apparently interpreting this as his cue to acknowledge the applause. Cadet Murphy has challenged every assumption, broken every rule, and redefined every standard. He has turned military training into performance art, strategic thinking into creative writing, and combat into interpretive dance with weapons. The crowd wasn't sure if this was praise or an indictment. Jake seemed to take it as a compliment and gave a thumbs up. During his time here, Cadet Murphy has forced us to completely rewrite our training manuals, update our safety protocols, and question fundamental assumptions about the nature of military education. Our insurance premiums have tripled. Our maintenance costs have quadrupled. Our psychological counseling staff has requested hazard pay. Commander Vex's voice grew stronger, though the eye twitch remained. But he has also shown us something extraordinary. He has demonstrated that the most dangerous weapon in any arsenal is not superior firepower, advanced technology, or tactical brilliance. It is the ability to think outside the box when everyone else doesn't even know there is a box. The commander straightened, and for a moment something like pride flickered in his reptilian features. Cadet Murphy, you have been a trial, a tribulation, and a source of constant stress-related medical conditions. You have also been the most effective military trainee this academy has ever produced, not because you followed our methods, but because you forced us to create entirely new ones. Jake stood up when his name was called, walked to the podium with his characteristic casual confidence, and accepted his commission as a second lieutenant in the Galactic Defense Force. Any words for your fellow graduates, Lieutenant Murphy? Commander Vex asked, stepping back from the microphone. Jake looked out at the assembled crowd, at his fellow graduates, at the instructors who had somehow survived 6 months of his creative approach to military education, and smiled. Yeah, actually. First off, thanks to Commander Vex and all the instructors for not giving up on me, even when I accidentally broke your training facility that one time. Or those other times. Sorry about that, by the way. He paused, considering his next words. I guess what I learned here is that every species in the galaxy has figured out their own way to be awesome at military stuff. The Draconian have honor and strength. The Crystalline have precision and logic. The Void-touched have mystery and tactical flexibility. Humans, we've got something different. The crowd leaned forward, genuinely curious about what insight the notorious human cadet might offer. We've got the ability to look at any situation and ask, what if we tried something completely ridiculous? Most of the time, ridiculous doesn't work. But sometimes ridiculous is exactly what's needed. Sometimes the best solution is the one nobody saw coming because it was too weird to consider. Jake grinned at his fellow graduates. So my advice is, don't be afraid to be ridiculous. Don't be afraid to fail spectacularly. And definitely don't be afraid to try something just because everyone says it's impossible. The universe is a big, weird, wonderful place, and there's always room for one more impossibility. The applause was thunderous, though it came with an undertone of nervous laughter from military officials who were suddenly wondering what they had unleashed upon the galaxy. After the ceremony, as families and dignitaries mingled in the reception area, Commander Vex found himself in conversation with Admiral Krex Tar, the Supreme Commander of Galactic Defense Forces. So Vex, this human of yours, your report recommends him for special operations? Commander Vex nodded slowly. He's the most naturally gifted, unconventional warfare specialist I've ever encountered. He doesn't think like a soldier, he thinks like a force of nature with tactical training. And you believe he's ready for active duty? Vex considered the question, watching Jake demonstrate his Swiss Army doomsday device to a group of fascinated military engineers while Pip, Gornax, and Zara tried to explain human psychology to a gathering of xenobiologists. Admiral, I don't think the galaxy is ready for him. But ready or not, he's graduated, and he's someone else's problem now. Admiral Krextar studied Jake's file, noting the unprecedented performance evaluations, the extensive property damage reports, and the psychological assessments that basically amounted to completely unpredictable but surprisingly effective. His first assignment, the Admiral mused, it would have to be something appropriate for his unique skill set. What did you have in mind? There's a situation in the Outer Rim. Hostile alien force that's been systematically conquering independent colonies. They've defeated every conventional military response we've sent. Very advanced, very organized, very predictable in their tactical approaches. Commander Vex felt a slow smile spreading across his reptilian features. It was the first genuine smile he'd managed since Jake had arrived at the Academy. They're expecting us to respond conventionally. Exactly. They've adapted to counter every standard military doctrine in our arsenal. What they're not expecting is something completely ridiculous. Precisely. Across the reception area, Jake had somehow managed to get the Swiss Army doomsday device to produce what appeared to be perfectly brewed coffee, while simultaneously generating a small holographic display that showing theoretical applications of kitchen utensils in zero-gravity combat scenarios. "Sir, permission to make a recommendation?" Commander Vex asked. "Granted. Send backup. Not for Jake, for whoever he's going to fight." Admiral Krextar looked at the fresh-faced human lieutenant who was now teaching a group of senior military officials an earth-drinking song, while demonstrating improper uses of standard-issue equipment. "You really think he's that dangerous?" Commander Vex touched his nose, which had healed crooked and now served as a permanent reminder of his first encounter with human military philosophy. "Admiral, that human broke my nose on day 1. By graduation, he's carrying my spine. Not literally, but psychologically speaking, he has completely dismantled everything I thought I knew about warfare and rebuilt it into something that actually works better." "And you think he can handle an entire hostile alien invasion force?" Commander Vex watched Jake accidentally create what appeared to be a small tornado while trying to demonstrate proper coffee brewing technique to an increasingly nervous group of Academy staff. "I think the hostile alien invasion force should be very, very worried. And I think I'm going to request immediate transfer to the most boring, safe, predictable assignment available in the entire galaxy." "Such as?" "Diplomatic security for the bureaucratic councils of endless parliamentary procedure. Nice, quiet, absolutely no chance of anyone trying to weaponize lunch or befriend enemy artificial intelligences." As the reception wound down and the new graduates prepared to report to their first assignments, Jake approached Commander Vex for one final conversation. "Hey, Commander, I wanted to thank you for everything. I know I wasn't exactly the easiest student." Commander Vex looked at the young human who had fundamentally changed his understanding of military training, warfare, and the basic nature of reality. "Jake, you were the most challenging, frustrating, and ultimately rewarding cadet I've ever had the privilege to train. You've taught me that sometimes the best way to prepare for the impossible is to embrace the ridiculous." "So we're good?" "We're good. But Jake?" "Yeah?" "When you get to your first assignment, try not to accidentally conquer anything. The paperwork is terrible." Jake grinned and gave a casual salute. "No promises, Commander, but I'll do my best to keep the conquering to a minimum." As Jake walked away to join his fellow graduates, Commander Vex reflected on the fact that in 6 months, one human had managed to turn the most elite military academy in the galaxy into something resembling a comedy show with real explosions and actual learning outcomes. The galaxy, he said to himself, is about to become a much more interesting place. And somewhere in the Outer Rim, a hostile alien invasion force was about to discover that sometimes the most effective military response is the one that makes absolutely no sense to anyone, but including the person implementing it. Lieutenant Jake Knuckles Murphy was going to war, armed with creativity, stubbornness, and a Swiss Army doomsday device. The universe would never be the same.